Hey everyone, this is Pete, and welcome back to Atari A to Z Flashback, a series of short playthroughs of the 150 games that make up Atari Flashback Classics for Nintendo Switch. Today's game is Centipede for the Atari 2600. This was a 1982 port of the 1981 arcade game we've already seen on this series, that was originally produced by Donna Bailey and Ed Logg. Now, Centipede was very popular in the arcades, perhaps at least partly because Bailey decided when she was designing the game, along with Ed Logg, that she wanted to make something that would appeal to women as well as men. And sort of, as much as gaming is seen as very inclusive today, back in the late 70s and early 80s, it was still seen very much as a sort of boys' pursuit. And there was a heavy bias towards men working in the industry. So Bailey was one of the few women who were designers in the games industry at the time. So she wanted to make a game that was very inclusive and that would let people of all ages, all genders, however you want to specify people, enjoy the game. And so that sort of out the door with sort of military shooting and spaceships and that sort of thing, and in with something that was a bit more relatable, which apparently is gnomes shooting centipedes with magic wands at the bottom of the garden. Anyway, Centipede was incredibly widely ported. The 2600 version we're going to see today was just one of many. It came to most of Atari's major systems at the time, so it came to the Atari 8-bit computers, the Atari 2600, the Atari 5200, which we'll see next time, and it was also a launch title for the Atari 7800 in 1987 as well, so it continued to be relevant long after its original release. And then outside of Atari's own systems, it also came to Apple II, ColecoVision, Commodore 64, IBM PC, Intellivision, TI-99 and VIC-20 under the Atari Soft label, and Superior Software also released a BBC Micro version as well, so Centipede was all over the place in the early 80s. This 2600 version isn't the most technically impressive you'll ever see, but it plays really well. So let's go play Centipede.
Okay, here we are once again with Atari Flashback Classics, and today we're looking at the Atari 2600 version of Centipede. This is another one of those games that there's multiple versions of in this collection, although not quite as many as Asteroids. There's only 3 Centipedes instead of 4 versions of Asteroids. Let's have a look at the manual for Centipede. So this is a slightly later release for the 2600, or at least this edition we've got here. As you can tell by the packaging there, you've got that sort of grey background with the rainbow stripe across the middle, and the fact that it's called Atari 2600 instead of Video Computer System. Alright, here we are. One lovely thing about this particular era of 2600 games is they always had ridiculous storylines added to them. So here we are. Here's the narrative for Centipede on the 2600. Once upon a time, in a misty enchanted forest, there lived a colony of good elves. These elves had a major problem, though. Their prized mushroom garden was infested with pests: a giant centipede, a poison-spreading scorpion, a mischief-making spider, and a pesky flea. The good elves tried everything they could to rid their garden of these bugs, but nothing worked. One day, an elf named Oliver was hacking away at a poison mushroom in the garden. Suddenly, he saw an unusual stick gleaming in the dirt. Just as Oliver picked up the stick, a spider jumped out from behind a mushroom and rushed at him. When Oliver waved his hands wildly to try to scare the spider away, sparks flew from his stick, and the spider disappeared. How did that happen? Oliver wondered out loud. Could this be a magic wand? Soon, Oliver had another chance to try the wand. When the scorpion scurried across a row of mushrooms, poisoning every mushroom it touched, Oliver pointed the wand at the scorpion and shouted, "Begone!" Instantly, the scorpion disappeared, and the poison mushrooms were transformed back into normal mushrooms. "This is great! This is the tool we need to clean up our mushroom garden," Oliver shouted ecstatically. With his newfound magic wand, Oliver hid behind a mushroom. "Okay, you great big centipede," he said. "Come out wherever you are. I'm ready for you now." So yeah, but you never knew that was the lore of Centipede, or the lore of the 2600 version, anyway. Anyway, you start the game with 3 magic wands as shown in figure 1. Every time you score 10,000 points, you win a bonus wand. You can have a total of 7 magic wands at any one time. Any wands won after that are not held in reserve. Okay, if the centipede, spider or flea bites you, your wand is snatched away and you become temporarily paralysed. The game will stop momentarily and all the mushrooms are counted for bonus points. So basically, you lose a life. Yeah, I mean, you probably know how to play Centipede at this point. But here's some details about the enemies, which might not have been immediately clear if you've just played the arcade version. So the Centipede itself is made up of 9 body segments, and they wind down from the top of the screen. Each time you hit a segment, it becomes a powerless mushroom, and the body segment behind that mushroom becomes the head of a new centipede. The centipede attacks in 8 distinct waves. In wave 1, the centipede is composed of a head attached to 8 body parts. In wave 2, it has a head attached to 7 body parts plus a detached head. And so it continues like that. You must eliminate the wave 1 centipede only once, then until your score passes 40,000 points you must destroy each subsequent centipede wave twice. First as the centipede moves slowly towards you, and then as it moves past. After you score over 40,000 points, each centipede will only need to be destroyed once. Okay, there's some complicated stuff that I didn't know. We've got the mushrooms. As you know, the spider jumps all over the battlefield. You score 300, 600 or 900 points when you zap the spider. The closer the spider is to your wand, the greater the score, so that's officially how that works. The flea starts bugging you after shoot away most of the mushrooms near you. It drops straight down, creating mushrooms as it falls. You must hit the flea twice to make it disappear. After the first shot, the flea drops twice as fast. Yeah, so that's authentic to how the arcade version behaves. Sometimes, after you clear 3 centipede screens, the scorpion will scurry across the battlefield, poisoning every mushroom it touches. But if you zap the scorpion before it runs across an entire row of mushrooms, the spell of poison is broken and the mushrooms remain normal. Poison mushrooms are a deadly white colour. When a centipede bumps into a poisoned mushroom, it goes wild and plunges straight through the field of mushrooms towards you. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. Information about scoring and some helpful hints. And that's it, basically. So, I mean, everyone watching this probably knows how Centipede works at this point. So, let's have a look at exactly how it's implemented on the Atari 2600. So, unusually for the games we've seen so far, we have a title screen, which is not something you see an awful lot in early 2600 games in particular, and particularly not sort of Atari games. You would sometimes see it in sort of games from other publishers and developers like Activision and so on. But yeah, we've actually got a title screen here. Oops. With the actual title of the game, a copyright in 1982. No credit, of course, because Atari didn't credit its developers, as we know, as we've seen a good few times at this point. But we've got some nice sort of flashing colours and colour flow and that sort of thing. Let's play. So I don't think there's... Oh, there are 2 versions. So the game selects switches between standard play and the children's version, which is an easier variation. We are all adults here, hopefully. So let's play standard play. Now you'll notice that the graphics are quite limited compared to the original arcade version. So like the spider is moving by character rather than by pixel. The thing you're controlling is just a square rather than attempting to look like anything else. And the mushrooms are just little rectangles as well. But you know, it doesn't really matter all that much because the mechanics of Centipede makes sense regardless of what you're actually looking at. So the actual sort of setup and context of what you're doing in Centipede, it doesn't really matter how that's being represented, because this is a game that's all about the mechanics and all about flickery sprites apparently, which might not show up on the video capture. So if the Centipede did disappear for a moment there, I do apologise. Not a lot I can do about that, unfortunately. Since my capture equipment will only record at 30 frames per second. If you would like to help me invest in some equipment that will let me capture at 60 frames per second, then please see the links in the description for links to my Patreon and Ko-fi. Bit of gratuitous shilling, I know, but, well, you know, sometimes you got to give it a try, haven't you? The other thing to note is that this is apparently a fair bit easier than the arcade version, because I'm doing a lot better than I usually do at the arcade original anyway. think part of that might be down to the control scheme. Because in the arcade original, if you remember... Oh dear, we're dead. In the arcade original, if you remember, you used a trackball. And in this particular port for Atari Flashback Classic, the port of the arcade version, that was mapped to the analog stick, which made for quite a sensitive control scheme. Which took a bit of adjusting to, whereas what we've got here, you've got a digital control scheme that was originally mapped to the Atari 2600 joystick. And so you've got a digital control scheme with some... well, that scorpion moves fast, doesn't it? Yeah, you've got a digital control scheme with some acceleration. So if you hold down a direction, you'll gradually accelerate in that direction for as long as you continue to hold that direction. So if you want to move a bit more precisely, then you just have to sort of use short taps. Another bonus life. The sound effects in this are actually surprisingly authentic to the arcade original. I mean, I guess that's not altogether surprising, given that the arcade original had... You would have probably had fairly similar sound hardware to what's in the 2600. But like that little bonus jingle in particular sounds identical to the arcade version, which is quite pleasing. I've not played this version before. I've only really played the Atari 8-bit version, which is the same as the Atari 5200 version that we'll see next time, and the arcade version, along with various reboots and remasters that there have been over the years. I remember there being quite a good version on Xbox Live Arcade a while back. There was a brief period when we had a bunch of old Atari games that were sort of remastered with fancy new graphics and stuff, and I remember the version of Centipede on there being pretty good. Yeah, that's a slightly different mechanic to the arcade original, isn't it? Where... Because in the arcade original it only counts partially destroyed mushrooms for that bonus when you lose a life. Whereas in this one it's counting every mushroom on the screen. Oh no! Yeah, you know what? I'm rather liking this version. I've sort of historically kind of resisted playing it because it always... I mean, it's easy to sort of assume that this is the inferior version of Centipede, what with it running on the worst hardware. Or the least capable hardware, I should say. But no, this is actually a pretty enjoyable version. It does everything it needs to. It's got most of the features of the arcade version intact. Like, the only real sort of limitation it's dealing with is the flickering sprites. Which, I'm just going to have a quick check at the options. Yeah, we've already got that unfiltered. Which you should sort of minimize the flickering as much as possible, but it's still happening. So yeah, I mean, let's just turn that back off just to see what happens with this one. All right, let's have another go. Game reset. Off we go. Oh yeah, the Centipede flickers much more like this. It's probably becoming almost invisible at times for you right now, so, you know, before we go any further, I'm going to turn that filter back on. Just so you might actually be able to see what's going on. There we go. So there's still a bit of flickering going on, but it's not sort of doing that weird semi-transparent thing that it was before. That was an honest request, by the way. If you would like to sort of help me out with some better capture hardware, which I would like to invest in at some point, just precisely for situations like this, then yeah, do check out my Patreon. I even have things that I can offer you in exchange. Yeah, I normally don't like shilling it beyond sort of the little outro I do in all my videos, but you know, sometimes the situation comes up when it's worth mentioning exactly what benefit having that better hardware would have on these videos. And like that 2600 port of Asteroids that we saw before would have been a good example as well, because the standard behaviour on the Asteroids of that was to flicker for some reason, presumably so that they sort of looked a bit more sort of ethereal and transparent, but because they flicker at 60 frames a second, if you're capturing at 30 frames a second, you only get every other frame, which means you only get them when they don't appear, which is not terribly helpful. Oh god, we're getting into a bit of a mess here. Oh, I'll tell you what else this game is missing, and that is a high score reading. Which would have been good. But, again, there was sort of, I don't know if you call it an expectation, but there was certainly an accepted practice at the time that if you wanted to pursue high scores, then you'd probably write your own high scores down. And indeed, some manuals for this era of games even provided a section in the back of the manual to actually write down your high scores. That's where the sort of oft-mocked note section in game manuals came from. That was originally for recording high scores and stuff, in the absence of a way of games being able to save your high scores, or indeed even display them at all in the first place, in the case of this game. Presumably that's just a memory constraint thing in this one. There's every little bit of memory counted on the poor 2600. So if it didn't have to store a 5-digit number, it sure as hell wasn't going to. Ah. Oh god. Oh god. So many poison mushrooms up there, and those scorpions move so quickly. I should probably try and destroy some of those poison mushrooms. That will make my life a bit easier, won't it? See, we're playing tactically now. Ouch. I may be playing tactically, but I'm still playing badly. There we go. Anyway, that's Centipede for the Atari 2600. You've pretty much seen everything there is to see there. It's a fun game though. I like that port. I like that version. We'll probably have another go at that at some point. So next time we'll look at the Atari 5200 version and how that compares. And that's, as with most 5200 games, it's very similar to how the Atari 8-bit version came out as well. But for now, just remains for me to say, as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please help out the channel by leaving a like or a comment and subscribing. New episodes of Atari A to Z are on Tuesdays and Atari ST A to Z on Thursdays. Check out atariatoz.wordpress.com for a full archive. Do please also check out my other projects moegamer.net, where I explore Japanese and Japanese-inspired games from yesterday and today, and videopackgames.wordpress.com, which aims to catalogue the small but well-formed library of the Philips G7000 Videopack computer, also known as the Magnavox Odyssey 2. You can also support my work on Patreon or buy me a coffee. You can find links to do both down in the video description. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.
Bye.